Good morning, and good morning to everybody. This happens to be one of my favorite topics, which is the timeline for writing a K or an R-type grant. And so I'm going to start with 10 habits of successful grant writers. The first is to think ahead and plan backwards, and that is basically what I'll be talking about when we talk about the timeline, and develop a concept that fits. So what do we mean by that? First of all, it fills a gap. So you have to make sure that whatever you're proposing is a quantum leap forward, not just a simple extension of what's in the literature. So it takes time to figure out what that gap is. It's important to funding agencies, so make sure you always choose the right funding agency, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, and test the hypothesis. And something I cannot overemphasize is matching your specific aims with the hypothesis. All too often, I've seen grants where the hypothesis looks very good, but the aims don't test it, and there's a disconnect. And once that happens, the grant is basically sunk. And then finally, short-term investment and long-term goals. And what I mean by that is, I know this sounds crazy, but at the same time you're writing the grant and you're thinking, well, if I'm successful with this grant, what would the next one look like? So you're actually at the same time planning ahead. The other things are to have a secret weapon. I like to say, think out of the box. Try to think about something that's truly unique that could be taken from another area and applied to your own research then. Always talk to the program officer ahead of time to make sure that what you're proposing would fit into the study section or the institute that you're proposing to send it to. Think like a reviewer. Be critical. You must be critical of your own work. Get feedback, and we'll talk more about that, but getting feedback from colleagues. Obtain the assignment. Again, once you know what the assignment is, you want to make sure that it's in the right study section, so talk to the program officer again. Be persistent, and what I mean by that is simply, if you don't get it funded the first time, which happens a lot, unfortunately, don't give up. My favorite word is perseverance. Turn around, respond to the criticisms, and behave reasonably, and you got a good chance to get your grant funded on the second go around. Okay, so here's a good question for you. Your grant is due February 1. When should you start working on it? Well, since this is virtual and I can't see anybody, I can't ask anybody for the answer, so I'll give you the answer right off the bat. It's October 1. Yes, it's a long way off, but as you'll see in a minute, there's a lot of things that take place between the day that we start writing the grant, October 1, and the day that it's due, February 1. So how do you start the process? Well, first of all, you're going to gather background information, do a literature review, and you want to definitely look at the rigor of prior literature. The NIH is emphasizing this very much now. Rigor and reproducibility is a key thing in evaluation of grants. And in fact, a grant can be rejected if the rigor and reproducibility section is not up to what the study section feels is necessary. Gather your preliminary data and get some rough ideas about hypothesis and aims, and now you're ready to kind of go. So that's about 3 weeks, I estimate, usually. It could take more than that, but it rarely takes less than that. So now it's October 21st. So you meet now with your mentor and your collaborators. You discuss your hypothesis and aims. Now there's more writing and rewriting, trying to get a little more preliminary data, maybe you don't need any more literature review, again, rigor of prior literature. This is also a good time, since you're going to be meeting with your mentor, to start talking about a mentoring plan. At the same time, it's a good time to start thinking about your biosketch. So these are things that you can be doing as other things are taking place as well. So now it's about a month later, and you're going to meet with your mentor and your collaborators again, and there will probably be more rewriting. And now, most importantly, start thinking about getting letters of support. This is really important because you may have some collaborators that are at the same institution or at another institution, and if you claim that they're collaborating with you, but you don't get a letter of support from them, there's a pretty good chance that the reviewers are not going to believe that they're actually going to be committed to your grant. So again, always get those letters of support from collaborators. And obviously, your mentor has to write a letter too, and you want to get him or her to start helping you with that. Then Now that you've got a pretty good draft, it's time to present it to a mock study section, and at the same time give the grant to at least 2 scientists to review, and you expect to get it back in 3 to 4 weeks. This is something I cannot overemphasize. I can tell you from my own experience, I've written many grants over the years, and I thought it was as clear as could be and really good. And then I gave it to some scientists, and I found out that what I thought was right or correct was not correct or didn't make sense. So always give it to some other people to read. That's the best way you know if you've really got what you think you've got in terms of your proposal. Now it's, okay, I'm going to skip on to the next slide. And so now you've got the grant, you got it back, you got some critiques, and now you're going to rewrite it based on critiques. Don't be disappointed if people tell you this is not right or that's not right, or you need to rewrite this or rewrite that. That's actually what you want to hear. You want to hear people really being critical of your grant. If somebody says, oh, it just looks great and doesn't give you any feedback, then that was not a very helpful critique. Almost certainly when you give it to additional people to read, they're going to find flaws, they're going to find things that don't make sense, and that's really what you want to hear. You want to hear from people that are going to be critical of your grant. Okay, so now you've rewritten your grant based on the critiques, and you're ready at some point to submit it to your research office, and then you can kind of just sit tight and wait for the study section to meet and give you the score that will get you your grant. So now I'd like to turn to one other timeline, which I think is extremely important that people forget about. And that's the timeline for the specific aims. This should be the last thing in your grant. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to convince the reviewers that you know how much time it's going to take to conduct each one of your specific aims. I like this particular format. I've used it for years, where you list the specific aims and then the years of the grant. Not only do you have to show when you're going to do the aims, but you need to provide a rationale for them. And so, for example, this is some of the verbiage that I've used in the past. Specific aim 1 will start with the grant and run into year 2. This will be an extension of our preliminary data. Specific aim 2, which does not rely on specific aim 1, but will derive some data from it and will start in the middle of year 2 and continue for about 1 year. You want to emphasize, by the way, this is a point to make the point that your second specific aim does not rely on your first specific aim. You don't want a situation where if aim 1 doesn't work, then the whole grant will fail. And then finally, for specific aim 3, we'll start towards the end of year 2 and continue until year 5. Years 2 to 5 will be devoted to data analysis and writing and submitting manuscripts. Towards the middle of year 5, we will start writing the competing renewal. No, excuse me. Obviously, we're very optimistic about this last point, but it doesn't hurt to put it in to show that you're thinking about continuing this research for some period of time. So that's all I have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.